So my name is Chris Knight. I'm a product manager at Deltek, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use hybrid data pipeline in our SaaS offerings to allow our customers to get to their data in all sorts of different ways. So first thing, a little bit about myself. So as I said, I'm product manager at Deltek. I'm responsible for cloud, compliance, and security. So I look kind of across all of our products and make sure that they play well in a SaaS environment, that we have a consistent messaging for our clients, that we have a consistent way to access our data, that we have consistent compliance across the board, security posture, et cetera. So there's a whole team behind me that you can't see that has enabled success there. But I'll get into a little bit about Deltek here. So Deltek ultimately serves project-based organizations. We provide software to help them manage their business better. Our markets are, once again, focused on project-based organizations. Typically, we've seen that in GovCon, the United States. We see that in professional services, and as well as some project-based commercial companies. We are owned by a parent company called Roper. It's a publicly traded company. We've been in business for about 35 years. We have a ton of products, have a lot of customers. And over the last 5 to 10 years, well, over the last 5 years, we've really tried to shift our strategy from an on-premise deployment model to a cloud deployment model. So we have customers that are sitting in both worlds. We have, and so we're helping them along their journey. We have a pretty wide portfolio of products that help them acquire contracts in business, help them manage that when they get and the people and the resources and plan it, help them deliver it, keep track of things, as well as measure their success and their performance metrics across the board. So I'm not here too much to pitch Deltek. If you have questions about that, follow up a little bit later. So a little bit about ground to cloud. I imagine many of you have been involved in that at some point in your life. And generally speaking, you start with all your databases sitting over on premise. You got cloud. You're just going to move them over. It's going to work, right? Hopefully you'll have reporting for that. The trick is, you guys might have noticed that there's these stragglers here, right? You have these other business systems that are sitting there on premise that you can't move for some reason, right? Maybe a vendor doesn't offer it, maybe comfort level, maybe it's 30 years old, right? There's a lot of different reasons of why you may have distributed infrastructure or use different vendors for different things. And so the issue comes in is that when you start needing to report across many, like for example, Deltek providers have reporting capabilities inside their environment, right? They have a Cognos, they have enterprise reporting, they have Qlik, they have all sorts of different things. But you also have a system back here on premise. And so you're kind of presented with this question is, which way do you go? Do you pull that data, do you pull your cloud data on premise? Or do you create access from your cloud to on premise so you can pull it into an EDW or to reporting or whatever? Or do you do it the other way? And so, as many of you have probably found out, when you plan it one way, everybody wants to use it the other way, right? And so you have to have a little bit of flexibility there. And so, a couple clicks behind. And it doesn't really just stop itself at reporting, right? You have integrations, people getting data back and forth. If you have an action or process inside your organization, inside that that business on premise or that application on premise, you want to trigger something in the cloud. If you have something in the cloud, you want to trigger it on premise. You also want to analyze the data. You want to report on the data, and you also, in some cases, customers want to pull certain subsets of data and store it in specific ways for retention purposes. Even though that vendor may provide backup services or whatever, there's still that hesitation to dive full into cloud. And so, one of the challenges that Deltek faces is that we have companies and customers all around the world, right? We're in Asia, we're in Europe, we're in the United States, and with that comes some challenges. We have compliance needs with GDPR, for example, in Europe. We have NIST and FedRAMP in the United States. We have clients who sometimes who are spread across the world, who have conflicting compliance requirements, right? And so for us, it was very critical that we had region-specific solutions here. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be a different solution, but we needed to be able to support each region without transferring data across the world, nor limiting them from transferring across the world if they want to. So, there's a little bit of both. It needs to make sure that it needs to be secure. by whatever compliance drivers they have and from their own internal organization. So I'm sure many of you get security questionnaires, or you're involved with security questionnaires and evaluating vendors and making sure that they're doing all their things. And it's the same question that Deltek gets. And so we need to make sure that we have a strong security posture, we're maintaining our risk and understanding it, and that our customers can do the same. And one of the challenges here is because we have customers that are so small and customers that are enormous, the use cases of people trying to get to this data varies. You got somebody in accounting of a company of 20 who just wants to pull something into an Excel. And they have to be able to make that work, as well as the person who's trying to pull in something from all their organizations around the world into one EDW and do testing, and a data warehouse and do testing and stuff, or not testing, number crunching. Sorry. And then we also wanted to make sure that we weren't limiting the ecosystem. We weren't tying it to Salesforce. We weren't tying it to this or to that. That customers, regardless of what reporting tool or destination that they're going to, that they can leverage the tool of their choice. And then finally, you could be a cloud vendor, you can also be a SaaS vendor, and sometimes they're not exactly the same thing. A SaaS vendor, the idea here is you need to be able to scale. And for the most part, you want your deployments to be very similar, so that you can build out automation, you can build out, you can do your vulnerability management, you can do your source control, everything is all in line, and so you get the economies of scale. And so we needed to support this in a multi-tenant environment, both for our enterprise clients that are a little bit more flexible and can do all sorts of different things, as well as our more foundational clients that have an out-of-the-box solution. And so we've been working with DataDirect for Progress for many years now. We were originally on their DataDirect, I don't know what
DataDirect Cloud.
Yeah, DataDirect Cloud product. And eventually they came out with hybrid data pipeline, where you could host it yourself, and you could build it up as you needed. And so as it started out, we found out that they had multiple deployment models for hybrid data pipeline. And I'll let Julian kind of cover that a little bit, but we kind of have an edge case on the use cases, so I'll let you talk through the first.
So my name is Julian. I work with Progress in the DataDirect group as a solutions engineer. I worked with Chris and his team for many years, I think even back to those early D2C days. So like Chris mentioned, hybrid data pipeline at a high level is a data hub that allows you to connect to data that's on-premise, or data that's behind a SaaS application, or even just a data source that's in AWS or Azure, whatever it may be. So we give you the flexibility to connect to that data however you want in terms of using ODBC or JDBC. There's also OData. We talked a little bit about OData. I noticed some of you from my talk yesterday when I talked about open analytics a little bit. But there's really about 5 or 6 use cases for HTTP, and these are the 4 big that Chris had put here. And these are really what we see most often. The first being the HTTP only deployment. So one of the great use cases is working with Salesforce, who's a partner of ours. And what they allow you to do is, if you have some data that's external to Salesforce that you really can't, for whatever reason, move it actually to Salesforce. A lot of times that's because it's expensive. If you're a small or medium business and you have maybe an old legacy CRM system that you want to have, that you have this legacy data in terms of your clients, but the cost of moving that to Salesforce just makes it unrealistic. So they've opened it up a bit to where you can expose that data as what they call external data. It's called Salesforce Connect. And the way they do that is via OData, which is just a REST-based way of connecting to data. So you can basically look like, if your Salesforce is your Salesforce, not Salesforce, not capital S Salesforce. Your salespeople are using Salesforce. They can see that data side by side within one view of Salesforce. The ODBC deployment kind of works side with that use case as well, but it's also the idea that you can essentially connect to multiple data centers across the world. So the OPC is what we call the on-premise connector, and it's a technology that allows us to connect to data sources that are behind a firewall without opening up a port. So usually IT and InfoSec is very happy about this because we essentially use HTTPS, which is already open anyways. Essentially, if your firewall allows normal internet traffic, we use that port to allow us to communicate to data sources that are behind a firewall. So now there's no longer need to support a VPN. You can just use our client to connect to that. But the nice part of that, though, is also the fact that you can have, if you have a data center in Europe, data center in the United States, or wherever it is, you can get to all of those data centers behind their own unique firewalls and have a single point to where you can connect to all that data. The cloud ISV deployment, this is really just, I have multiple users. They all have maybe their own version of data that they want to connect to. You don't necessarily want to restrict them to, I only work with SQL Server, I only work with Oracle. Because DataDirect is that hub, it's that ability to connect to basically anything that we support from Progress. You're allowing essentially your end user to connect to as many sources as they want. And this is sort of the big picture. This is, regardless of your how you want to connect, whether it's OData, whether it's ODBC or JDBC. So the idea of open analytics, allowing your end users to use whatever technology they have today, whether it's Tableau or PowerBI, to connect to that, you essentially give them the choice of which one of those connections, and there's no necessary restrictions on your end from the ISV standpoint. You can allow them to do whatever they want in terms of that connectivity. And that's a super high level. There's a lot more to this, and I didn't want to necessarily go too technical just in case, I don't want people falling asleep, but I'm at the booth, the Progress booth, so if you want to dive into, how do we do the on-premise connector, what do we do with OData, feel free to stop by and we can talk about that.
Perfect. So if you couldn't tell, Deltek uses this final deployment method. So we have a multi-tenant cloud in different regions, and we need to make sure that our customers can access their data through a variety of means from a product of their choice. So there's, as I mentioned before, we had some challenges and some considerations that we needed to work with. We needed to make sure that hybrid data pipeline could fit. And the idea is that we needed to be able to do separate deployments, and that's pretty straightforward. You spin up a separate environment. We needed to make sure that we could deploy it in a redundant environment. We have a certain uptime SLA that we work towards. Everything that we deploy, everything that a customer could connect to, we want to make sure it has backups, has redundancy, et cetera. And so that was also a key requirement. We needed to integrate it with our Active Directory to make sure that we can manage our users and manage customers' users in a consistent and controlled manner. We also needed to work with our automation infrastructure. So we have a tool that we use to provision accounts, to set up new deployments, to do all this other stuff, it needed to tie into that so that we take the manual people process out of this and make sure that it's a solidly built, repeatable, automated process. And then finally, it needs to work in a multi-tenant environment. So if you have a single SQL server running with different schemas and databases for each client, you need to make sure that you can ensure that one user can only get to one database and they can't get to other ones. And so we're deployed fully almost completely in the Amazon cloud. We're also expanding to the Microsoft cloud as well. And the idea here is it needs to work with our keys, it needs to work with our infrastructure, it needs to work with our redundancy, it needs to work with our disaster recovery and all of our other processes. Now, the cool thing is one of the reasons I called out these additional needs is, for the most part, these are all features that Progress has added to the product for us. And so what's been kind of neat is that they've worked with us to implement appropriately. So we, as we moved from their cloud to our cloud, where there's a lot of conversations on how to set it up right, but in many cases we had, I think you guys added Active Directory, you added the administration API and the other API.
Multi-tenancy.
And there's a couple other features that are in there too. So they've been very responsive over the last couple of years to make sure that these get in so that they can work with our overall infrastructure. And so this is just kind of high level architectural diagram of kind of how we have it set up. We have a UTM in front to make sure we're managing all the traffic in there. We have a load balancer split between 2 different HTTP nodes that connect to the various databases behind the scenes. Now, there's many other things that are off to the sides, like the automation framework, the Active Directory. There's actually a database for HTTP, to store its settings and et cetera. But from a high-level perspective, we have one of these deployed in every region in AWS. So, that's it in a nutshell. We were going to open up the rest of this for kind of conversation. If you guys had questions about it, or yeah, go ahead. All right.
So when you say that you're exposing this as the data as a database, are you doing just that, or are you exposing this as an API that customers can authenticate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually have all of our products already have their own standalone APIs that they're using, and the challenges is that because we have companies of all different sizes, many times the larger organizations have developers on house where they can develop to an API. They can use REST. They can do this, and they can tie it into what they need to. But especially in some of the more professional services organizations, they just don't have that expertise. They could have someone who can has used Access before, and they wanted to create some reports. And so this fills a little bit of a niche for us, or for them, because we do have supporting solutions, to provide the full gamut. We have data export engine, we have APIs for all of our products, we have ODBC, and we also have built-in reporting that you can report internal and external data in. But when you want to pull it in-house, or when you want to get to it a special way, you want to find a solution for those customers.
Is it just the raw data that you're exposing? Is there any translation?
We don't do any translation on the fly. There's been some kind of discussions about that. One thing is, it's a balance between customers wanting real-time data versus customers, there's been discussion about granting them access to maybe a reporting database where it's gone through those transformations to make it a little bit more manageable. To be open here, we're only exposing read-only access here. We don't want them to fiddle with the database underneath the product. As fun as that may seem, but I guess it varies per product. Actually, a couple of them we do give them straight to the database, but we don't do on-the-fly translation for those.
And as a provision, since it's provision databases per customer, you don't have any sort of performance issues with people hitting?
That's a great question. So, is there any? I think this is made out of wood under here. So far, no. No. What we do is this is actually a read-only replica against the production database. So as opposed to using the core production write endpoint for our products, it uses the replicant there. So in case anything goes wonky, there's a little less of a chance for things to happen. But additionally, there are settings that we're looking at evaluating that can limit the number of, I believe, rows returned. There's some things where you can put limits on what happens on a per user basis when using HTTP.
And you have the capability too. Each HTTP node, he has multiple nodes behind a load balancer.
Yeah, and you can
each
scale it
node
out.
can handle. It's all it's multi-threaded. But then once you add the capability, the fact that we work closely with the load balancer that's built into AWS, it gives you a lot of resiliency and the capability. If you have failover, if one of the nodes goes down, you have. So your uptime is pretty high.
But one of the other things we did is because of that performance thing, each user at the customer has its own account, all the way down to the database. So we don't use one master account that you can just get to anything. So if something's going bananas on the server, we can trace that back to an individual user and call them up, or cut access, or set API restrictions on them to keep things in control.
So how often do you update that?
Real time.
So it's real-time replication.
Yes.
It's sitting there, read on the database, it's being replicated from production.
Yeah.
The throttling that you mentioned, you're sort of exploring, is that built into the
Yes.
HTTP?
Yep.
Yeah, you hope that they don't do anything crazy, but then the workday starts. Yes.
So, Chris, do you guys
Yeah, it varies. So we have tiers of our product, right? So we have like an enterprise tier where you get one of everything, right? You get a lot of flexibility in there, and those are typically, typically much larger clients, et cetera. That's included with those clients. And you can work your way down to, there's a bare bones kind of out of the box thing where someone just wants to spin up something. And we are actually in the process of rolling it out to those clients in the coming months. And so the idea here is, it's a bit of a balance, as being responsible for the for the infrastructure here is you want to make sure that you can measure the impact and that things aren't going to go crazy. And there's a lot of discussion internally about how risky is it to allow customers direct access to their database. Now, it's their data. There's no arguing that. We don't have a concern about that. But like, what are the implications of that? If they wanted to set up 500 users with this, why do you want all 500 users to have direct access to the database? There's a whole UI that enforces logic over here that you can control everything. And so what we do is we have a kind of a soft limit on the number of users from a per customer basis. And if they ask for more than that, then we have a conversation to make sure they're really not going down the wrong path. If they're sitting there and they're trying to use it to bypass functionality or feature or something like that, it's just something we just much prefer to support, explicitly build into the product, et cetera. Or we want to understand their use case to make sure that it's really intended for that. But yeah, we can charge for it just depending on what product you have. Long story short. It's never straightforward. And I mean, there's discussion about, you could always do pricing things later on. You can include it and stuff, but it's easing into it. Just like when you open up your API, and you have an API for a product, you kind of want to question if a user has 10,000 API users, or 100 API users. Like, what are you doing? Does it make sense? And it could be a perfectly valid use case, but you just want to make sure you can account for that.
Or would this be the kind of thing that you use when you're trying to win new customers to say, hey, look, we're totally open, we can do this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a market need for it, and customers are very interested in this, and for a variety of reasons. And it kind of amazes me as we talk to them. But at the end of the day, customers want access to their data, and when you're taking things from on-premise to the cloud, you want to make sure that they're comfortable that they can get it in almost any way that's reasonable, right? And so if they want a database export on a quarterly basis, it's best interest to find a way to do a database export on a quarterly basis, right? If they want to access it via API, you want to make sure that APIs are well documented and available. If they want to get in and do some stuff on SQL because maybe they want to pull it someplace else, they want to pull in their EDW, they want to pour in the reporting, they want to create their own report, they want to just take a look at the data and figure out why a certain time frame was a little wonky with their expense reports, then they can do that, right? And while we have a reporting tool that allows them to go through most of that, sometimes they want to do it in the comfort of their own tool. So.
Especially when they're trying to be multi-channel.
Yeah.
Right, you're trying to report here as well as across these other sources.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the some of these very, very large customers, they have multiple ERPs. They have a whole bunch of systems in the back end, and it may be a slow roll migration for them to get all of those different business units onto a consistent platform, and so they still have to tie that data together behind the scenes.
So could some of that be coming from non-Deltek applications?
Yeah, I mean, they'll have, yes, yeah. I mean, so we're exposing a way for data to come out of our cloud to pull it to wherever they want. And of course they have, I know Hybrid Data Pipeline has a ton of different ways where they can get it from other sources and pull it into a central location. We are not directly, Deltek's not directly part of that solution from a engineering and product standpoint, but our consulting team often comes up with ideas on how to help. All right. Well, if anybody has any other questions, I know this is a high-level walk. We weren't sure about how much details to get into, whether you guys, cared about TLS or FIPS or whatever, but we're just we've been very happy with it. We're excited to to roll it out to our larger customer base. We've been very happy with Progress and the features that they're going to continue to add to the product for us. No pressure. No, but it's been a very good relationship. And if you guys haven't had a chance, Julie and I were talking a little bit earlier. There's a security document that they have out that covers HTTP and the common deployment methods and ways to make sure that your deployment is secure and other things that they do to ensure that the product is secure. And that's been very useful for us. And if you guys are interested in their product, I'd recommend taking a look at it. It's been really cool.
Yeah, I'm a security guy, so if you guys have any security questions, or in general, just security questions, I'll be at the booth. Feel free to stop by.
And that was the discussion, and that's it.